One Russian city after the other was overrun by the invaders. And on July 17th, they captured the first main objective, Smolensk, regarded as the key to Moscow. Simultaneously, in the south, von Rundstedt's forces cut deep into the Ukraine. This was blitzkrieg at its best. The world gave Russia another 6 weeks, and the Germans issued a communique.
The issue in the east has already been settled. Smolensk is the last halt on the road to Moscow.
But then a strange thing happened. For the first time since the mighty German army started its career of blitz, smashing into submission one European country after the other, that same German army came up against a country that did not submit. Despite the fact that Hitler's army swept deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union, and by October the 15th stood practically within the shadows of the Kremlin, despite the fact that the Soviet government and all foreign missions were forced to move to Kuibyshev 700 miles to the east, despite Hitler's triumphant pronouncement, I can say that this enemy is already broken and will never rise again, despite the fact that by December 500,000 square miles of Russian territory, an area equal to the entire Middle Western United States, had fallen to the invaders. Yes, despite Russia's loss of her best agricultural areas, her most thoroughly developed industrial plants, millions of her people, thousands of her tanks and her planes, despite everything, those 6 weeks had lengthened into nearly 6 months, and the dread Nazi blitz had spluttered, stumbled, and finally died. What had happened here? Let's try to analyze it. First, in this titanic struggle, not only two armies, but two fighting methods and two strategies came face to face. The German strategy was based on the well-tried Keil and Kessel, or wedge and trap maneuver. One wedge would be driven deep into the enemy territory to hook up with another spearhead driven through to meet it. In the trap thus formed, the victim would be pocketed for annihilation. The German plan in every campaign was to seek a decisive battle at the moment of invasion.
A single blow must destroy the enemy without regard for losses. A gigantic, all-destroying blow.
Remember the campaigns you have already seen in these films. Poland, the Poles concentrated on their borders. The Blitz broke through. 18 days finished Poland. France, the Allied strength on the borders. The breakthrough at Sedan, and the issue of France was settled. The Balkans, the Yugoslavians rushed to the border. The breakthrough came, and in 12 days, Yugoslavia was gone. The Germans planned the same blitz against the Russians. But the Russians had developed their own strategy, one to take full advantage of the vast area of their land. The Russian strategy was a defense in depth, line after line, far back into the interior. And when the Nazi wedge struck, the first line would bend with it until it became part of the second. Again, the wedge would strike. Again, a segment would be lost. But again, the line would bend until it became part of the third. So the deeper the Germans plowed into Russian soil, the stronger their opposition, until finally they faced an unshatterable wall and were robbed of their chance to hit that all-destroying blow they had counted on. The result? The Germans conquered land and lost the campaign. For the Russian tactics kept the main bulk of their armies intact and made a long war inevitable instead of that quick decision the Germans sought. And the Russians had other tactics that threw the Germans for a loss. Germany had developed blitz warfare, mechanized warfare, armies on wheels, juggernauts to crush everything before them. But the Russians found a way to drag them out of their traveling fortresses. They used their cities as strongholds and made the blitz come to them down alleys. The more a city was bombed, the more impassable it became to the German panzers. They made the names of these Russian cities as familiar to us as the names of towns in the next county. Rostov, Kharkov, Kiev, Kursk, Smolensk. City after city standing in the path of the Nazi Blitz. The Red Army had found a way to make their cities of great strategic importance. Odessa, scene of an heroic siege of more than 2 months, held up the whole Nazi thrust into the Crimea. Sevastopol, which resisted every attempt of the Germans to break through. Here, for 8.5 long months, the Russians fought for the town, inch by inch, barring the Germans from the great Black Sea naval base located there. And finally, when the Germans entered the town, each district was defended street by street. Each street house by house. Each house, room by room. The Russians knew their cities would be demolished, but their objective was not to save cities, but to destroy Germans. A high price to pay for a copy of Mein Kampf. So the Germans were forced out of their armored shells to fight and to die in the hand-to-hand combat they thought they had abolished. There was another item the Germans had overlooked. They overlooked people. And generals may win campaigns, but people win wars. And on that fatal June 22nd, when the Russian people first learned of the invasion of their country, their grim faces told of their determination to fight and to die, but never to surrender. They knew this wasn't a question of who occupied what piece of land. This was a question of life or death.
This war is not an ordinary war. It is the war of the entire Russian people, not only to eliminate the danger hanging over our heads, but to aid all people groaning under the yoke of fascism.
So the alarm was spread to factory and farm. And from every Russian town and village, men poured forth to answer the call. From now on, one thing mattered and one thing only: victory. Total war meant total mobilization. Not war just for soldiers, but war for everyone. Young or old, male or female, made no difference. Age had nothing to do with it. If you were only 12 years old, there was work for 12-year-olds to do. Sex had nothing to do with it. If you could hold a rifle, you were a soldier. If you could turn a lathe, you were a soldier. If you could harvest the fields, you were a soldier. If you could handle a locomotive or pilot a ship or guide a tractor, you were still a soldier. For everything you did was part of that total war. Nothing that the enemy could use was left behind. Not a yard of wire or a pound of iron. Not an acre of wheat or a head of cattle. And the old men stood watch over the fields, ready to give the word to burn at the first sight of the enemy. Scorched earth.